2 million years ago, humans lived every moment one heartbeat away from death. They were not the kings of the world. They were meat on legs. In the tall grass, saber-toothed cats crouched, their eyes fixed on the weakest in the group. Hyenas the size of bears followed silently, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Crocodiles lurked in murky rivers, jaws open wide enough to swallow a child whole. Even the skies weren't safe. Giant eagles with claws like knives could snatch a person from the ground in seconds. Every journey for food was a gamble. Every trip to the river a possible death sentence. Fires kept the darkness at bay, but if the flames faded, eyes would appear in the black, circling closer. Children clung to their mothers, men gripped crude spears, knowing they were no match for the speed and strength of the predators that ruled the land. The plains, the forests, the rivers, all belonged to killers far older than mankind. Humans survived not because they were strong, but because they were clever, desperate, and lucky. This was a world where you didn't have to go looking for danger. Danger came looking for you. 2 million years ago, the world did not wait for us. It hunted us. The plains, forests, and rivers were ruled by teeth older than our stories, and every step we took was measured against something faster, stronger, and mercilessly patient. Dawn began with fear, and dusk ended with counting who was missing, because out there, the tall grass hid saber-toothed cats pressed flat to the earth, muscles bunched like traps, breath held, eyes fixed on the smallest hesitation. And when they launched, the world went soundless. Only the thud of impact, the hot spray of panic, the scramble of feet. Hyenas, bigger and heavier than the ones we know today, didn't chase so much as shadow us. Trotting just out of sight, testing our edges, waiting for a stumble, for a child to fall behind, for a wound to slow someone's stride, and when the light dipped, they closed in, their laughter a saw cutting through nerves. The rivers, wide and brown and pretending to be calm, were full of patience with teeth. Crocodiles lying like sunken logs, motionless until a foot slipped or a knee went deep. Then an explosion of white water and jaws, a life yanked under in a single gulping roll, and the surface smoothed again as if nothing had happened. Even the sky had claws, for great eagles rode the thermals and folded into killing dives without a whisper, hitting with the force of a falling stone, talons locking, lifting, gone. Mothers staring at empty air, where a heartbeat earlier there had been a child. We tried to build small islands against this ocean of danger, rings of thorns around camp, fires coaxed from coals at dusk, sentries with clubs and stones, paths mapped between boulders and brush, always with a mind to the wind, so our scent would blow toward safety and not toward the ambush trees the leopards loved. But nothing was certain because the night was a living thing, full of eyes that hovered at the edge of firelight, full of pads that made no sound until they were too close, full of growls that vibrated the ribs and told the spine to run. Sleep came in shifts, always interrupted, always half-waking, as sparks drifted and wood popped, and someone somewhere out beyond the fire cracked a twig on purpose just to hear what we would do. Meat meant risk, stripping a carcass with stone flakes while watching the horizon, listening for the cough of a cat, sniffing for the musk that meant we had only moments before the rightful owners returned. And even then, we left with hearts jackhammering, glancing back to see shapes racing low over the ground. Water meant risk, kneeling with one hand on a spear and the other cupping muddy water, eyes flicking between ripples and shadows because thirst was its own predator and the river loved to feed it. Gathering meant risk, roots dug from soil that hid snakes, berries plucked in quiet thickets where silence felt wrong, backs bent under loads that slowed feet just enough for something watching to notice. Travel meant risk, open ground baking under the sun while heat shimmer hid movement, gullies that looked safe but funneled us into perfect kill zones, rock shelves that promised views but offered only corners where surprise lived. Even our victories were thin because a day without loss only meant the predators would be hungrier tomorrow. Children learned early to keep to the center, to read the twitch of a bird's tail, the hush of insects, the way goats froze when they smelled a cat, to mimic adults without understanding why. Don't run in straight lines, don't break from the group, don't turn your back on tall grass, don't look away when the night looks back. Fear was not a feeling, but a tool. sharpened by failure, handed down with gestures and sounds that meant down, quiet, move, long before any of it had names. Sometimes we found caves and thought they were safe until a leopard returned to the den it considered its own. Or hyenas sniffed us out and filled the dark with grinding teeth and green eyes. And then the cave became a trap. One way in, no way out, our voices bouncing off stone while claws clicked closer. Sometimes storms flattened scent and footfalls made everything blind and loud, and predators used the roar of rain to mask their approach. Sometimes drought turned the world into a single crowded waterhole where everything that needed to drink, antelope, buffalo, us, stood too close to everything that needed to kill. Crocodiles, lions, ambush cats, and overhanging trees, and you could feel the tension like a hand around your throat as each animal waited for another to make the first mistake. We learned to love high ground not because it was beautiful, but because you could see an attack coming a second earlier, and a second was the difference between a sprint and a scream. We learned to carry fire not as a weapon, but as a plea, a flickering line against the press of night, nursing embers like an infant because a dark camp was an invitation with our names on it. Still, the circle of light was small and the world around it was endless, and the predators were not impressed by our courage. They only respected hunger. Many nights ended with counting scars and naming the lost, with silence that sat heavy because grief itself could draw attention, the slow sway of the grieving body, a kind of weakness that eyes in the bush read as opportunity. And yet we went out again because the stomach demanded, because life demanded, because the world did not care about our fear. Some days we watched as lions exploded from grass, the herd shredding in every direction, dust rising, our group freezing as though we could become stones. And even then, a lion might veer, take a divider, a watcher, someone whose mind had wandered for a breath. Death measured in the time it took to think a thought. Some nights a hyena pack probed, one from the left, one from the right, testing our line, drawing a thrown stone to see where the gap opened. And then the rush, the snapping circle, the scatter of feet, the snatch and run that left us shouting at darkness and clutching the air where a hand had been. We wore our terror like a second skin, but it taught us. We learned the sigh of tall grass when a heavy body slid through, the wrong silence that meant a cat had stopped breathing to be closer, the chuff-chuff of crocodile lungs just before the lunge, the descending hush that meant wings were folding into a dive. We learned that the land itself whispered warnings if you listened with everything you had. Bird calls switching from chatter to alarm, monkeys going from play to absolute stillness, the wind turning from friend to traitor in a single shift. And always the fire, our little sun, our trembling barricade, shrinking as wood burned down and courage went with it until someone fed it and the eyes withdrew a few steps. Not gone, never gone, just thinking their long thoughts. This was our world before we were dangerous. We moved in the footprints of killers, braided our days through the appetites of older tribes made of fur and fang, and every breath we took was rented against the interest of their hunger. We did not rule, we endured, by clinging to one another, by reading the earth-like scripture, by accepting that survival was not a victory, but a postponement, a small success borrowed from a future that would demand it back with interest. And yet in that endurance, in the way we watched and remembered and shared, a spark lived, not the kind that scares off eyes in the dark, but the kind that waits, building heat beneath ash, biding its time until the night is ready to learn a new shape of fear. For countless generations, we had been the meat, our days shaped by avoiding the jaws and claws of those faster, stronger, and more accustomed to killing. But somewhere, in the slow churn of time, something began to change, not in the predators, but in us. It started as whispers in the campfire's glow, ideas traded in the quiet moments between heartbeats. What if the hunt could be turned? At first, these were only dreams, the kind that came when bellies were empty and the night felt endless, but they rooted in us, deep as marrow. Our eyes, sharpened by generations of being stalked, began to measure more than distance to safety. We measured how far a spear could fly, how long a predator could chase before tiring, how the wind could carry scent not toward us, but toward them. The forest trails we once crept along with terror became maps of opportunity. We knew where the water holes were, which paths cats favored, where hyenas lingered after feeding. We learned patience from leopards, persistence from wolves, coordination from the very animals that hunted us. Stones became more than projectiles, they became plans. Spears, at first crude sticks hardened in fire, began to fly straighter, pierce deeper, and with every small success, our fear shifted. It did not vanish, but it became something sharper, something we could aim. At first, the hunts were clumsy, full of mistakes. We would spook our quarry too soon, lose track of a wounded antelope, scatter when a lion roared nearby. Sometimes we returned to camp with nothing but bruises and silence. But even failure taught us, and every scar was a diagram of what not to do next time. We learned to read the wind, to place hunters downwind of prey, to drive animals into gullies where they had fewer escape routes. Our voices became tools, shouts to flush game, whistles to signal, silence to strike. Slowly, the balance of power wavered. The predators noticed. They began to give us more space, not out of respect, but out of uncertainty. And we noticed that too. Then came the moment no one forgot, the day we hunted the hunter. It was a lion, huge, scarred, with a mane blackened at the tips and eyes that had seen too many kills. It had taken one of ours a week earlier, and its tracks were still fresh in the dust. Instead of fleeing its territory, we followed, not headlong, but in a slow, tightening circle, the way it had once stalked us. We watched it from the trees, moved when it moved, froze when it froze. When it rested in the shade, we blocked the approaches with thorn branches, inch by inch. When it shifted position, we prodded it with thrown stones, forcing it to move where we wanted it. Spears came from every side, not thrown wildly, but in a rhythm, one to distract, one to wound, one to kill. The roar that had once made us run now rang in our chests like a drumbeat of triumph. When the lion fell, we stood over it, not with joy, but with a fierce, almost reverent quiet. We had done what our ancestors would have thought impossible. From that day, the land felt different beneath our feet. Hyenas that once shadowed us began to keep their distance. Leopards still stalked the night, but we saw their eyes less often near our fires. Crocodiles still waded in the rivers, but we crossed with more confidence, spears probing the shallows before every step. And the great herds of antelope and buffalo, once animals we only scavenged from after lions had their fill, became prey we could claim ourselves. We learned to run them down not in a sprint, but over hours, until their legs trembled and their breath came ragged, until they stumbled and fell, and we claimed what hunger had driven us to chase. But perhaps the most dangerous thing we gained was not the kill. It was the thought that we could kill again. That the world was no longer a place where we only reacted, but one where we could act first. The same patience we had learned in fear now served us in ambition. We no longer measured the day by what we had escaped, but by what we had taken. And though the predators still ruled much of the wild, there was a new animal in their world, one that did not have fangs, did not have claws, did not have the speed of the cheetah or the strength of the bear, but one that had learned something far more dangerous. How to think like a hunter. Seasons bled into years, and the children who once shrank from every shadow now walked the game trails with steady, unflinching steps, their eyes sweeping the horizon with the calm certainty of those who knew they were no longer hunted. The change had come so slowly that only the oldest among us could recall the time when the roar of a lion could freeze the heart, when a rustle in the grass could scatter an entire camp, when the darkness itself seemed to press in with hungry breath. Now our fires no longer crouched low in hidden hollows. They burned high on ridgelines, bold and unafraid, their light visible for miles, a declaration carved into the night sky. This ground is ours. The wilderness had become a living map in our minds, every game trail traced, every watering hole noted, every predator's den memorized. We knew where the leopards dragged their kills into the trees, where crocodiles lay in patient stillness beneath green water, where hyenas roamed at dusk. Our tools had grown into extensions of our will, stone spearheads napped to razor edges, shafts hardened in flame until they sang through the air, throwing sticks weighted and balanced to strike with bone-breaking precision. We shaped the very land to our advantage, crafting snares and deadfalls hidden beneath leaves, pits lined with sharpened stakes that swallowed prey whole, thorn fences that funneled animals into narrow kill zones where no escape was possible. We trained our bodies and minds alike, learning to distinguish the whisper of wind and grass from the tread of padded paws, to smell the copper tang of blood before it stained the earth, to feel danger through the trembling of the soil beneath our bare feet. Hunts were no longer chaos and desperation. They were orchestrated performances, each step a note in a deadly song. Scouts read the earth as if it spoke to them. Flankers guided herds into ambush, and the hunt leader chose the perfect moment to strike. Then came the chase, a relentless, punishing pursuit under the beating sun until lungs failed and legs faltered, until even the strongest fell. We did not always take only the weak. Sometimes we chose the boldest, the ones who threatened our camps, the predators who had grown too confident. A saber-tooth, drawn into a shallow trap, fell under a storm of spears. Lions and hyenas gave our fires a respectful distance. Even vultures began to follow our hunts, knowing we always fed the land with death. We learned to bend the seasons themselves to our will, burning grasslands to steer migrations, timing our movements to follow herds, striking where food and water narrowed the path. We traded knowledge between distant bands, exchanging stories, tools, and strategies like treasures. Our nights were no longer silent. They pulsed with the beat of drums and the flicker of signal fires, messages passing across the dark like the whispers of gods. Slowly, without roar or sudden upheaval, we had become something the earth had never seen. Not the fastest, not the strongest, but the predator that thinks, remembers, and plans. And in the eyes of the beast that once hunted us, there was no longer hunger, only wariness, and something deeper still, the dawning recognition that the balance of power had shifted forever.